Hello everyone, and welcome back to Airdrie Public Library Virtual Programming. I'm Adam, and today we are back in Scratch to make a new game. Last time we made Pong, one of the first games ever made, and today we are going to make a game called Tic-tac-toe, which you've probably played before on a paper with a pen. Now, before we get started, you might be asking why we're doing such simple games to start, and that's kind of to build up those building blocks, that foundation of knowledge, which we can then build on top of it. Right now, or earlier we made Pong. Right now we're doing Tic-tac-toe. And then after that, maybe we can build to something like Space Invaders, or Mario. Maybe on top of Mario sits something else we've seen before, Super Smash Brothers. That's a platform fighting game, and maybe underneath that there's a different fighter like Street Fighter. Maybe Mario and Space Invaders builds up to something like Legend of Zelda. And all this kind of builds up together as our knowledge increases to make more and more complex games, to make the one that's most important, which is your game. That's why it's important to learn the easy stuff first and then build up on top of it instead of just jumping straight into the complicated stuff, because then that can feel very overwhelming. And one other thing I want to talk about is before we even get started in programming in any kind of game, there's this kind of loop we want to go over. First, we have to make some decisions, and that starts with how do things look? Then we want to go into how is it used, or this is sometimes called the user experience, or UX for short. And then finally, how does it work? So, for example, our tic-tac-toe game, we want it to look like this, and we want X's or O's to show up. And that's how it'll look. We then go to our user experience, and we want to say, okay, when these boxes here are clicked, we want a O to show up, and then maybe an X. And if you click this one here, maybe an O shows up. And that's how the user will interface with our game, by clicking these boxes here. And how does it work? Well, maybe we have a button in each of these boxes that can flip between X or O, depending on which turn it is. And then once 3 in a row has been made, we win, and then it goes back up the looks. What do we want the win to look like? Maybe a big box shows up and it says X wins, or a big box shows up and it says O wins. In more complicated games, you can continue this kind of loop, going back down into user experience and doing like maybe a replay option, or maybe difficulty. And then you continue even further. How does that work? But for this simplicity here, we're just going to stick with what we have. All right, so this is kind of how we want our game to work. Let's get started with programming it. So we don't need this cat right off the start. We can get rid of that. We can immediately jump into doing our looks first. So I'm going to just paint a new sprite. You saw me hit this paint option. And let's use this line tool and make our game board here. There. Now we have our game board, place that in the center, and now we can start making those buttons, right? So we've made this game board, and now we need to make these X and O buttons that can flop in between. I think I mentioned it last time, where you can have these little costumes, right? So I'm going to go into here, I'm going to search a new costume, and I'm going to search for X. I'll take this one, and I'm going to search for O. Scroll down. Now let's take this one. Now, one of the problems with Scratch is that for something to be clicked, it has to have pixels that you can click on. So for this, I think I'm just going to make a lightly colored blue. And we're not going to have any outline. I'm just going to drag it like this, move it around. Let's try and center it and make it just as big as we need. And I can move this to here to try and get the right size. It doesn't matter if it's just a little bit too big, because we'll be putting those black lines over top of this box anyways. So I'm going to copy this and make a few more costumes so that I can keep this in every frame. And I'm going to actually copy this, put it into there, copy the O, put it onto there, and then delete these other ones. And then let's rename these costumes as well. So this is blank, this is X, and this is O. Awesome. So that's the majority of our looks done now. We can actually just end up copying this button around. But before we do that, let's add some code into it first. So there's a few things we're going to need. To start, we always go into events. We're going to pull out when the flag is clicked. This will be for resetting it. And then we're going to want when the sprite is clicked. So let's jump into looks and take out switch costume. So when the flag is clicked, we want to reset everything to 0, to blank. When the flag is clicked, switch costume to blank. And then when the sprite is clicked, we want to switch costume to either X or O, depending on whose turn it is. But we'll figure out the turn order in a second here. Right now, when I click this, it changes the costume to blank. So let's do the turn order real quick. I'm going to jump into variables. We've made a variable before. And make sure that the turn order is for all sprites, so that all of our buttons can share the same turn order, and I don't have to worry about managing the turn in each one individually. Let's just call this turn for all sprites. And when I click the backdrop, I want this to also reset the turn. That, let's say, X's always go first. Variables, we're going to set turn to 1. Now, the turns are going to flip-flop between 1 and -1. So we can say, like, 1 is X and -1 is 0. go back into our button here, and we can start putting those controls in. Under control, we're going to use an if statement. Actually, we're going to use an if-else statement. We only have to check what turn it is once, and if it's not that turn, we can assume it's the other turn. Under operators, I'm going to pull out this one with a triangle bit that has equal sign. And under variables, I'm going to pull out my turn. So now this says, if turn is equal to 1, change my costume to X, else change my costume to O. So the turn right now, if we hit this, should be 1. We click this, it turns it to X. But now we need to change the turn. So we're going to say, if it's 1, change turn to -1. That'll flip-flop it. And if it's -1, we're going to set turn to +1. Now, when we keep on clicking this, it changes. But once something is clicked, we don't want it to be clickable again, or else that'll just make an impossible game that never ends. So I'm going to create a new variable, and this one's going to be for this sprite only. So that's a local variable, which means each one of our buttons is going to have their own version of this, instead of it being shared by all of them. Now I'm going to call this empty. Think of this like a question mark. When we start, we're going to set empty to yes, we are empty. Under control, I'm going to grab another one of those if statements. And operators, I'm going to grab another one of those triangles with the equal sign. And back in variables, we'll put our empty into that. So if empty is yes, then we will be allowed to do everything inside here. And once it's done, once it's been clicked, we're going to change empty to no. Not change, sorry, we're going to set empty. So let's reset this. We can change it to X, and if we click again, it won't let us, because empty is now no. Alright, sound good? So we're going to copy this around a little bit. First I'm going to reset. Let's name this button 1. We're going to duplicate this a couple of times. Let's see, there are 3, 6, 9 buttons we will need. 9 buttons. Let's grab number 1. This one can fit right in here. Number 2. This one can fit here. Number 3. This one can fit there. Number 4. And so on and so forth. 7 is, oh, this is 7. How did that get over there? Okay, where's 2? 2 needs to go here. 7 needs to go here. This is 4. This is 5. This is 6. I completely lost everything underneath here, but that's okay, because I'm going to grab this by that little dot there and just make it sit on top. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Perfect. Let's make this a little bit prettier just by centering everything.